Hey everybody, this is Tommy and Kimberly from Ravens Creek, and today we want to bring you a little bit of Ravens food.
Because March is Women's History Month, we thought it'd be fun to go through the idea of modesty. But as we started looking in and researching and collecting some of the ideas, we were like, wait a minute, there's a lot going on here that really needs to get unpacked. There are hundreds of things happening before we hit the issue of modesty and go sliding forward on something that they call modesty, but it doesn't really have to do with our English word of modesty. Suddenly, modesty is just about clothing, but we want to present the idea there's a whole lot more going on, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
The issue of modesty is usually being taught to our kids somewhere around the middle school age, as early as in the youth group, and usually it's being taught in two different ways, one to the girls and one to the boys. With the boys, what they're being taught is that you're now going to start experiencing an attraction to the girls, but it's never left at just an attraction that's natural. It's always pushed to you're going to start lusting, and you don't want to lust, and it's a bad thing, but it's going to be a struggle every day. Now, when we think about it, that doesn't actually apply to the rest of your life because eventually the hormones die, and I'm not a 15-year-old boy who's experiencing this anymore. So here, as a married man who doesn't have the same raging hormones that I did in puberty, how does this apply to my life here and now? It really just doesn't apply the same way.
One of the strange things that we find that happens during this time that we're all going through the change and that we're facing puberty, and they start to come in and they start to tell the boys, like, you're just gonna feel new emotions and feelings and attractions, and it becomes about feelings and emotions for boys, which isn't something that's necessarily promoted throughout their whole life as boys and as men. So they may not have the previous experience of having to deal with the range of emotions and how do you keep them in place and what do they really mean, and connecting that like emotion and that thought together correctly. Now, in the middle of puberty, we're telling them that they have emotions and they have feelings, but it's natural, so they're just going to feel it, don't even worry about it, and we're teaching them right there to ignore the feelings and the emotions. Where the women who we tend to teach them how to keep their feelings and emotions in a certain amount of control and how to feel them and then to be done with it. Now we're teaching them it's not about your feelings and emotions, it's about your body because your body is a problem. In case girls aren't already freaked out enough about going through puberty and all of its changes, plus hormones, plus fitting in socially, now their body is somehow inherently sinful. These people who they used to be able to just talk with and play with, now there's like social systems set up, plus there's an attraction, but they can't interact because one of the first things that we're going to teach them is shame. And it's not about honoring one another and continuing to interact and the benefit that that can bring. Instead, we call it modesty, but what we're presenting is shame.
We bring a division in between the sexes. We teach the boys that it's about objectifying the women. And even if we don't use that wording, and of course we would never use that wording, it's exactly what we teach. We show them, now you're going to find an attraction to these girls, and you're going to be looking at their bodies, and it's going to cause for you to get excited. But we never actually go in any deeper than that to explain to them there's a natural, beautiful thing that's happening, and it's not a shameful thing. It's instead we're saying this is going to be a means for your temptation and for your falling into sin. And so no longer are the boys looking at the girls as somebody who they get along with and somebody who they can relate to and somebody who they can talk to and play toys with. Now suddenly the girls are something to avoid. Now suddenly the girls are something that you don't want to go into temptation because these girls are going to be dragging you down. Now how do you take that and then relate that to when you're older and you want to get into a relationship with girls? How are you supposed to figure out how to talk to them? Because you've now created a division in your mind that has been put there by your youth group leader or pastor or whoever. How do you take and get over that so that you know how to relate to them, how to talk to them, how to be a human being expressing emotion and expressing an attraction and an actual relating to one another as a man and as a woman?
Now, as we look at this issue of modesty, we see it really does come up surrounding the youth group range.
Right.
Sometimes it goes as far as maybe like a mid 20s, but beyond that, you don't really see it. And we kind of wondered what might be happening here within the Christian realm that's not pushing modesty further out than that. Does everybody have it mastered by then? Or what's really happening? And then we kind of fast forward and look ahead and we see, well, if people are getting married anywhere from their 20s and 30s and so forth, then maybe one of the things that's happening is it's transitioning from this youth group and single adulthood to transitioning into marriage. Can we find similar tracks that were made and then covered up with the issue of modesty? Can we find that in marriage? Some of the boyish and girlish things that happen back in youth group and back in learning to relate to one another, or in many cases, not learning to relate to one another, but segregating the genders. And so, talking together, we actually did find some tracks that lead through.
And one of the big things for me personally, when I was in college, I was actually a part of a group that we as men gathered together and talked about the issue of pornography and our addiction to it. And the whole idea was that in talking about it and in getting everything out on the table, we could then grow together to overcome this. Now, one of the things that I found is that in both cases, it was oftentimes that junior, senior in high school and then college age kids. However, there were also guys who were in this pornography group who were married in their late 30s and their 40s, who the only reason they were there is because their wife caught them looking at pornography. Now, here's the question. One, why is it that they're using pornography as a means to avoid their wife? And two, what is it that is it something that they had brought from their high school and college years, or is this something that has recycled in their life? Now, if we consider this, we can really come to the conclusion that there's still something that is missing. There's still a relating that's not happening in the marriage that is causing for the man to feel as though he doesn't have the fullness that he was promised in his marriage. And so he's still turning to the things that he should not be turning to. And he's still this, well, every day you're lusting and every day it's a struggle. But it shouldn't be. Because God made us all beautiful and He made us all pure and He made us all in a way that we can relate to one another in an unsinful way, especially in Christ.
In our youth group, where we're teaching boys that they're now going to be like this, and girls, they're now going to be like this, and widening a gap of division between them, and suddenly not helping them to relate and to honor one another, then we go and you remember as that age, it was hard to relate and hard to
Right.
just tell somebody how you feel. And if you think about that, you can't just tell them they're cute or they're beautiful or I really like you or you're
Right.
attractive. And though there might be multiple reasons for why you can't tell them, if you move forward into marriage, you can actually see something similar happening. There's not a relating happening. There's not a expressing that attraction in a healthy, beneficial, and at ease kind of way. Instead, there's not a way to express the attraction. Instead, in youth group, we've made sex is the problem, so sex is the focus. And if we've come into marriage and sex is something that's been experienced, but that's not enough of a way to express attraction and emotion, then what have they been taught now that they're married
Right.
to use within the realms of marriage? Or are we just going to start sending them to marriage seminars now that they're old enough for that?
And really, this issue of expressing attraction, it goes beyond just expressing attraction. What if there's a problem? What if you haven't been able to learn how to express your attraction, and so now when there's a problem and you need to express, I don't know why you do this. I don't know why we can't communicate in these ways. Suddenly, you're not able to express that either. And it's not because you're shy. It's because you don't know how to communicate. And so in our lack of communication and our lack of practicing actually being one with each other and relating to one another and actually coming together in unity, we've caused for a lot of troubles and a lot of problems to happen in the marriage life. Both good things that should be expressed and aren't being expressed, and bad things that need to be dealt with and overcome that aren't being overcome because we're just letting it fester.
If we've not learned how to interact with the different genders, then it's hard to become an adult and see that problem and change that mindset. And not everyone's doing that. And especially if they're being taught, like, this is the correct way to look at it. Like, this is a sexual problem, this is a lust problem, and you will have it your entire life.
Right.
It must be dealt with mechanically. And if that's what we're teaching, we're not mechanical people. We are living beings, and there needs to be able to be a expression and communication. And if we're not teaching those things and we're not teaching them in a healthy way, then we're going to find that there are quickly and easily some breakdowns. Why would it be that in marriage that there's going to be something that happens, and then instead of being able to express to one another what's going on and coming together and continuing to evolve and bring that unity and oneness into more fullness, the original thing that we were counting on, marriage itself and maybe sex
Mhm.
itself, didn't bring that oneness or isn't continuing to bring oneness. Where else are we going to turn if we don't have communication, if we don't have expression? This is some of the problems that we're coming up with. And therein, it's not hard to see why we look at Christianity hitting about the same number in divorce rates as those who are considered secular.
As men, we're taught that we're going to lust for all of our lives. And we're taught that we're going to have to deal with temptation and just suppress it and say no to it and keep going. But when you read the Bible, you find these stories like in John 8 when this woman is caught in adultery and brought before Jesus. Jesus doesn't seem to be tempted when she's brought before him. And if you think that she was like fully clothed and fully modest, you probably don't understand how adultery works. Yet Jesus looks at her with compassion as a human being, and the way that he responds is according to love and compassion. Now, this should be available for every single one of us who's a man. We should be able to look at other women and to see them as human beings and not have that temptation, not have that lust, to be able to acknowledge beauty and yet not be looking at their body and going, "Oh man, there's something that's missing within being a man himself. There's something within masculinity that we're missing." To be able to look at women and appreciate them for their beauty and to not go any further than that. To not lust in a way that Jesus is saying, to lust, you're already committing adultery.
It's like Jesus actually expects that men have a built in ability to have self control and self discipline.
Right.
And not only that, but to be able to retrain their thinking so that they can see another person, even if it's female, as a person. This is a really interesting concept that most of Christianity, which is supposed to come from Christ and his ideas, doesn't agree with. So, how could we have such a conflict? And when these conflicts do come up, what are we going to go with? With Tommy and I, we always go with the example that Jesus gives and the words that he speaks. If this Christian system of ours is teaching elsewise, they can go off the deep end with that, but we're going to stick with Christ and what he's teaching and the examples that he's giving. Christ didn't give us a lot of examples of body shaming women for the sake of being women. Is that because in his culture they were all modest? Because we know that it was said of Jesus that he hung out with sinners, even said that he hung out with prostitutes. Right. How could Jesus remain sinless if this was really the crowd he was hanging out with? Don't we all know that bad company corrupts good character? How could Jesus do this? Did he had to put on his God shoes that day in order to be with these people? But then we know that God doesn't hang out with sinners. So what's really happening here? The problem is our flaws in our Christianity and our thinking when we're trying to be this ultra religious and we're trying to teach a moralism that ends up being a legalism, hopefully on accident, but it does lead that way. And instead of dealing with issues like how we are made different, but how differences work together, we just end up with we are different. And it just has this big cavern between us, and we have trouble communicating and relating, and we end up with phrases that even secular people use, like, oh, you know, those men, they're always, or all women do. How can that even be true when God creates us with such uniqueness? And in Christianity, when Christ never says such a thing as that, how can we endorse that kind of saying or that kind of thinking?
Right.
I understand that Paul gets blamed for a lot of things, but Paul isn't Christ. He didn't die for us, he didn't resurrect for us. He just tried to help us understand the things that Christ already taught. But we can still go to the example and the words of Jesus, because some of the other apostles willingly wrote down some of the most beautiful stories that they remember about interacting with Jesus. We are not a lost cause, and we don't just have to follow everything we're taught. There's a source to look at to find the examples we need and to have that solid character. But if we're not teaching solid character and building on that, then anything we're building on is probably just going to go the way of the house that was built on sand. There's a collapse, there's a destruction, but this isn't because you were naturally made for destruction.
When you look at the Gospels, we do find examples of those who kind of segmented themselves away from those who were sinners and prostitutes. They're called Pharisees. Jesus hung out with those who probably weren't the most modest of people in any regard, considered to be drunks, considered to be prostitutes, sinners, tax collectors, thieves, you name it. And yet these Pharisees, they had the idea of, well, we need to be righteous, we need to be holy, which means we need to go ahead and make sure we're separate and out of the way and not with that crowd. We have this in our Christianity today. We're almost teaching the boys, you need to make sure that you're able to build up righteousness and holy character. And that means stay away from the girls. But then in staying away from the girls, they never learn how to actually interact with girls. They never actually learn how women think. They never actually learn how it is to relate to them and to be able to talk with them on a human level. And it's the same way with women, that how many times, even in the secular society, do you find that women say, men are just a mystery, I can't ever understand them? Or men say, I never can understand what a woman is talking about. How many times does this happen? And it all comes down to the fact we teach people, don't go near them. And then when they don't go near them, because they're trying to be righteous and holy, they have no idea how to even talk to them. And that's not righteous and holy.
The Bible actually talks about, if you want to develop character, character comes from persevering. Dealing with suffering, persevering, developing character, and that character should develop within us a hope. A hope that doesn't put us to shame. A hope that isn't just about our depraved nature. A hope that isn't just about always being lustful, but being able to control it. There's something bigger that's happening. I mean, do we believe that the Messiah came and started to bring us the kingdom of God and the restoration of all things? Or do we not believe it? And are we still under these things like laws that we can't possibly ever keep? Which one is it? We want to talk about the new covenant. We want to say that it's so much different than the Old Testament, but then we don't act like it at all. And the children who need to hear it the most don't hear it. And the young Christians who need to know that God has put within them the ability to overcome, the ability to relate, the ability to see the uniqueness and tie it together. God's put that in them. That's not what we're teaching them at all. We're teaching them, like, you want to develop character, you need to be isolated. The Bible doesn't teach that.
When we come to the issue of modesty, it's so often, I guess it's always actually, spoken that it's the way that a woman dresses. But really, modesty shouldn't be about the way that a woman dresses so she doesn't tempt the boys. Because the boys should be able to have a character that they're not going to be going that route anyway. So here's the issue. When we're looking at modesty, it should be something that is able to express the beauty that you naturally have. And yet so often it's like, unless you're wearing a burqa, you're not being modest. Which of course we, again, never go that extreme, and yet that's almost exactly what's being expressed.
If we're trying to cover up something that's sinful, we can't put on enough.
Right.
There's not enough clothes, there's not enough repentance, there's not enough to cover up something that's sinful. Jesus takes away sin, and yet females still look like females. That's not
Right.
sinful. That's not what it is. It's not like you come to Jesus and there's like a boob reduction that happens, or your hips go in and you become flat everywhere and more boyish. As a matter of fact, there's many scriptures in the New Testament that are used against women that are likely saying to women, it's okay to look like a woman. Just
Absolutely.
because you now have come into Christianity and have new rights that your culture didn't give you doesn't mean you have to be like a man or look like a man. You don't even have to act like a man, because God needs both sons and daughters, men
Right.
and women, men servants and maid servants, and he blesses all of them, and he gives gifts to all of them. The modesty that all of us should be working on isn't about clothing. It's about something that happens in your heart that
Right.
allows you to have a self-control, a self-restraint, and allows you to show honors to other and not have to have it for yourself and not have to have glory for yourself. That's where modesty is, and it begins. It's in the heart. It's not about these outward clothing, because we know that God does not look at the appearance,
Right.
and yet we push appearance. We need to step back for a moment and look at the divisions that are happening and see which ones does Christ represent, which ones have God endorsed over all the ages, and which ones have we put in there as a response to our culture or following the footsteps of our culture or whatever it is. The things that are in the Bible are timeless. We don't need to use them as our own noose. God gives freedom.
When you look at First Peter chapter 3, this is one of those passages that deals with beauty. Peter goes through how women shouldn't adorn themselves with braided hair and with gold and with all of the fancy fixtures, but instead that beauty truly comes from a gentle and quiet spirit. Now, we can debate as to what a gentle and quiet spirit is, but notice the point. The point is that your modesty, your clothing, your apparel, that's not what makes you beautiful. What makes you beautiful is your character, your integrity, that which God has invested in you. And so if we as Christians are telling our boys to be attracted to the body and to the outward apparel, we're kind of teaching them that which is secular and calling it holy. But if we teach them instead to be attracted to the godly character, to be attracted to a woman who is gentle and quiet in spirit, who shows the beauty of holiness, if we're showing them that kind of love and appreciation for the woman, now we're actually teaching them something that they can pursue and that can change their lives.
We're teaching them something that allows them to begin to interact. What if we also teach them that there are women who are going to bring out good things in them,
Mm.
and there are some women who are going to bring out some edgier or bitter or other things in them as well. But there's an interaction that does happen, the beauty and the uniquenesses coming together and playing together. One of the other things that may be accidentally happening when we're telling boys that they're going to be attracted to women's bodies and that body becomes such a big image, boys themselves understand that their body suddenly has to
Right.
become a certain amount of impressiveness, which is something we all struggle with at that age. But what happens when, as they go on, if something happens, whether a car accident or a soldier coming back from war, what if they lose a part of their body and they don't even feel fully human, let
Mm.
alone like attractive anymore? Because we've made, as Christians, we've made the big topic be about image and about body, and that was never something that Christ taught. And we're also teaching our girls something so similar, like if they have like skin problems, if they
Mm.
don't look a certain way, if they get too much attention or if they get ignored too much, it's all their fault and it's all about the body. We've learned that when it comes to beauty, it can start anywhere. It can start internally or it can start externally. It can be you get a makeover, and that's
Mhm.
the thing that clicks for you, that you can be a sense of beautiful, whatever that uniqueness is that God put in you. Or it could be something internal and developing confidence or a character that you didn't have strongly before that can make you feel beautiful. But the only way to maintain beauty is an internal thing. Beauty can start anywhere, but the only place it's ever maintained is internal. And that's not just for women, it's for women and men. It's for everyone to be able to have that. And so when we become so outwardly focused, we're not under God's wisdom anymore. We're not cherishing His creation. We're not tending to and keeping all the creation like He asked us to do from the beginning. Instead, we're intentionally hurting and isolating one another, and that is just not something that Christ ever promoted.
This is something that is dear to my heart because we have two examples of it, both going in different directions. Here in recent history, we have the issue of Nazi Germany, who saw the Aryan race as like the supreme race. And so what they considered beautiful and what they considered to be the true thing that we should pursue, it was this blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan kind of mentality, and everything else was going to just be killed. But we have the same issue that we have people who are psychologically killing themselves, if not wanting to commit suicide because of depression and other things, because they don't fit into the body image, or they don't fit into this or that image, and because they don't fit into whatever segment that we've made, they feel like they're worthless and they have no contribution to society. That is absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that we can teach modesty in a way that is going to cause for people to potentially have that thought about themselves, it is not only ungodly, it is antichrist.
Whether you're raising children or you've just been a child at one point in your life, whether you consider yourself beautiful or beautiful is always something that's just beyond you, whatever it is that you consider yourself to be, this is a message that we can all grab onto. We all have somewhere that we need healing, that we have imperfection, whether it's externally or internally. There are things that we mean to work on together, and together those uniquenesses help us to build up and to become fullness. It is in the working together that allows us to experience the fullness of who we are and for that beauty to be expressed. So if this is something that sounds a little familiar to you, join us again as we continue down this messy, unclean journey.